Today we are blessed not just to be here, but to hear from a very powerful individual, very well-known individual, yet a Redford individual. Jay Johnson is an internationally known speaker, trainer, and organizational consultant specializing in behavior and performance. Jay works with Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies, governments, and NGOs around the globe to provide support in developing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and implementing them as an essential part of their culture. He is a TEDx speaker with millions of views on his TEDx speeches, a Forbes Business Council member, and has given keynote and workshops in more than 30 countries across 4 continents. Please receive Jay Johnson.
Thank you. In any time that I'm going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or any space like this, I think it's really critical to acknowledge the fact that in some of your minds you might be going, why in the hell is there a cisgendered, white, heterosexual, normative male that's going to talk to us about unity, that's going to talk to us or have a conversation or start a conversation about connection? I acknowledge that privilege. And I want to ask a question by show of hands out here today. How many of you watched some of those statements in that video and felt mortified? These are our youth. And the problems that faced Dr. Martin Luther King are still here today. One of the things that I want to acknowledge, and it's a quote about the best trick that the devil ever played, that ever pulled, was to convince the world that he didn't exist. And I'm going to relate that to systems of oppression. The best trick that systems of oppression have ever played was to convince people that they don't exist. And when we look and we see, if that video didn't make you feel just a little bit uncomfortable, if that video didn't make you want to get up and go do something, then I'm going to encourage you to reflect on that. I'm going to encourage you to think about, what is your position? My message here today is courage over comfort. I know that there are some of the students that were in this video, including India, who edited that, and Kara, who oversaw that project. Can I have you stand up here today and be acknowledged for the strength and for the courage that you demonstrated by getting out there and talking about subjects that are hard to talk about, subjects that adults shy away from. Be proud of yourselves. And it is until more voices such as them stand up, and it is until more voices such as us that are here in this room today take the opportunity to have difficult conversations, take the opportunity to choose courage over comfort, to ask ourselves, what is my role in the world today? It is when we start asking those difficult questions and taking the opportunity to truly connect, that is the only place that we will find unity in our community. We have to do better. The children who talk about their experiences, now whether you've experienced that or not, whether it's something that you agree with or not, that is the life experience of kids here in Redford Township. We've got to do better. But how do we do that? So why am I here? Part of the reason that I'm here is I work on behavior. Behavior is the actual thing that creates culture, that creates community, that brings people together. It is the micro behaviors at the micro level that create the macro culture, identity. You have power. You have the ability to create positive change. One of the things that Dr. King said, power without love is reckless and abusive. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. Until we start loving each other, until we start utilizing this community to connect with each other, to take the power that we are given and utilize it in a way that elevates the voices of our children, of our people, we're going to continue to see the same things. 50, 60 years later, the systems of oppression still exist. This time, they're a little bit more covert. Now, we've seen in the news where recently, I don't know if you've seen this, the Citibank out of LA just got hit with $31 million fine, $31 million for redlining. And if you don't know what redlining is, this is a great example of one of the systems of oppression. They put one branch in a heavily black and Hispanic populated area, one branch. And in that branch, they did not put a single person in there to do anything with loans, to be able to provide loans to people. Dr. King talked about one of the biggest ways for generational wealth is for home ownership, and advocated that as a huge component of his work to bring economic justice, because economic justice is something that could bring the opportunity for social justice. This was 3 days ago. $31 million that they are fined. Is that sufficient for decades of oppression? No. It's a slap on the wrist. Who in here has heard of Project Breadbasket, Operation Breadbasket? Okay, I'm going to encourage you that when we're done here, I want you to have conversations with each other, but I also want you to look into Operation Breadbasket, which Dr. Martin Luther King actually performed in Chicago and Cleveland and Atlanta. And what was the whole concept of this? If you respect my dollar, you must respect my person. It was a movement that was created to build economic justice. Dr. King went into the places where the poor were unorganized and said, hey, listen, collectively, if we start utilizing, we will spend our dollars at places that hire black people in the community. Because there is a number of different stores that were in the slums or in the areas, as Dr. King said, that were not willing to hire black people. They did not invest in the community. They did not actually do anything to try to change the systems of power. But all of a sudden, in Operation Breadbasket, Dr. King mobilized the individuals to say, you have a choice of where you spend your dollars. You have a choice, and if we all decide that we are not going to spend our dollars at the store, it will put economic pressure on those systems. And it was highly effective. In fact, in its first year, it generated more than 2,000 jobs for black people in those areas. $15 million worth of continual revenue going into the pockets of the people who had been oppressed. This is my challenge for you. As a behavioralist, I like to try to help people change the behaviors that ultimately affect an entire system of culture. Whether I'm working with Johns Hopkins, whether I'm working with Ford Motor Company, whether I'm working with anybody around the globe, it's the same thing. Your micro behaviors determine your macro results. So I challenge you here today, in the spirit of Dr. King, there is hope. You saw the messages of hope, the things that these students ask. Have a conversation. Check your bias. I'm biased. And until I am capable of saying that in front of an audience such as this, until I acknowledge my personal privilege, I can't change my behaviors to overcome it. It is essential to understand that human nature, but the very thing that helped us survive as humans, the very thing, the limbic reaction, the brain science of this is what I study, the brain science of this, that creates fight or flight, is the same brain science that creates the other, us versus them. Dr. King was elevated above that. He used a different part of the brain, the cerebral cortex, the logical, rational, thinking part of our brain, to overcome the ancient part of our brain that created differences. And he used a message of love to overcome that. How do we, from here, today, start to look at our micro behaviors? Where are you spending your dollars? Whose conversation are you having? Are you willing to acknowledge and represent that you come from a position of bias? All of us do. When we can acknowledge that, now the conversations can begin. And we can listen to those students to say, hey, you know what? Let's take the time to get to know each other. Let's take the time to understand each other. Let's take the time to work together towards a better future for them and for all of us. We've got a lot of work to do. And if you sit in your cone of comfort or silence, if you allow the things that we see out there today without taking action, without doing something about it, you're complicit in it. And that's really hard to hear sometimes. But if you choose courage over comfort, if you take the opportunity to not let those microaggressions pass by, if you take the opportunity to walk into your HR office and say, how is our hiring practices? Are we actually creating equity in our hiring? If you walk in there, thank you, yes, 100%. If you walk into those offices and say, what are we doing to elevate voices that are getting silenced? Because it's not enough to say, hey, we have this many people in our organization. My question is, do those people have a voice in leadership and decision making? And until that voice is elevated, Dr. King's dream of equality and equity will not be realized. And I'm challenging each and every one of you, and myself included, listen to the students. Heed the perspectives of Dr. King. Choose courage over comfort. Acknowledge what your position is. And take those behaviors to help us build the unity in our community that we deserve, that we need, that is human, and that is everything that Dr. King gave up his life and his entire work to be able to accomplish. Here we are. In 2023, when we go out to breakfast in the other room, I encourage you, have the conversations that are difficult to have. Acknowledge your points of privilege. Acknowledge the voice of the other, because it's not us versus them. It's us, and we are all human and deserve the dignity, respect, and justice afforded to those that have been considered elite. We will do better if we just listen to Dr. King and choose courage over comfort. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today.